The sacred feminine, a great energy able to move heaven and hell with it, find in the flesh through the women the generation of life, the principle of one emotional intelligence that generated the universe somewhat throughout history. His role was in the background, walking life. A dominated system is exclusively by men in the regions. In doctrines, in various facets of our history and instituting world that we know in a patriarchal society. However, its role was much greater than that, we were told. Registered teaching in old manuscript documents and oldest papyri on our planet, including in the Garden of Eden, which mysteries retain female influence in seniority because that feminine power has been deleted. What is the difference of the garden from biblical Eden to the Garden of Eden of the Sumerians, and which god the ancient command our world? Save my dear friends, although we are in the 21st century, numerically the majority of women are. Idea of the female figure influencing, commanding and even governing is not new. It play an important role in training of ancient civilizations. We know that the overwhelming majority of archaeological evidence revolves around of men. However, there are several examples of matriarchal societies, though for many historians this concept is really disturbing in various cultures and worshipped female deities. Since there was a time when the female was considered the most important part of humanity, was sacred, there are representations of God in the councils and big hips that this is the ancestors revered gods and did not only male gods. NASA Central and in the so-called woman ideas was one of the most important sources of energy. There were different, even holy women in places. How to kidney China in some societies like the Nordic, and of course there are the maidens, fierce with shields, more powerful than many men. The so-called Amazons, but this term, it was not a single tribe. That word used to refer to different women's societies that survived several parts of the world. Ancient, for example, there were Amazons. Not will make, but will it be that even with your role suppressed, some priestess of the time helped build go Mount Df, are kings of some grandiose construction. No doubt a Saberi is difficult, however can be very possible, and we shouldn't Oscar such this because there are references in ancient texts that bring a mother goddess before the first civilization. The researcher A. Park explains that when we look carefully, the first Genesis chapters on creating the garden, we are in the void. This is due because many events are not in the Bible, but there are previous texts in the documents in the Babylonian texts of Sumerian as the garbage number. The creation document brings many information, but there are also the interesting Gnostic Gospels, as that everyone brings a mother goddess who come from depths. Sophia, for example, loving her, even this is the one that reached the point deeper to create a world like that we know in the Gnostic books. Clear Sumerian in the Egyptians to the abyss. This is always linked to the process of creation of the mother goddesses. This because Sophia means wisdom. It is said that in principle before there was a force creative, everything is in the dark, and the wisdom existed in darkness, and to create should be feminine, so create a concept of a female deity who embodies the perfection of wisdom and all knowledge of the universe, and if the wisdom came out of the darkness and its feminine nature, according to the ancient texts, so why at one point it was replaced or forgotten. Biblical stories already sees forbids beings, humans who were in the Garden of Eden, from pick the fruit from the forbidden area. Then the snake with vice is to eat the forbidden fruit, carrying Adam and his wife expulsion and consequently losing eternal life, ate the forbidden fruit called fruit of knowledge. However, in the Garden of Eden of the Sumerians is counted different according to the duty the snake leaves, approaches the woman to free her, giving you knowledge of good and evil, and the serpent is the god that the scientist genetic of mind. But before there was a Matriarchy. When the gods arrive at land, establishes Web a chain of mountains there to come under the domain of the goddess Cheer. The queen. In the original Sumerian texts, the woman transmits only the information that the serpent gave to humanity to be self-sufficient and be free from slavery. Also, when mentioning a female messenger, refers to woman how to read thrush. But if there was a wise woman, where was? Researchers like Fred Silva discovered other stories that revealed trained women who were obtained from the Bible. Of the best examples, the shift from matriarchy to patriarchy revolves around the history of Jesus. Two important evidence band of the Bible are the Gospels of Felipe, and also they were found by two goat herders from the desert of Nag Hammadi. Jesus was born to a woman when it reached another level of understanding. Studying in schools of mystery was formed, making your son of the name in the next step the direct Son of God in your initiation process. This is a evolution of consciousness undertook various powers projecting outward of the body in the astral did near-death experience, reaching the deep trance, the great transit psychic in the face of his elevated consciousness. However, was born of a woman, was taken care of by a woman, and her follower favorite was a woman, Maria, from Magdala to Maria. Besides, women were called bees, the caretakers of the flock. The shift to the patriarchal system happens when the Catholic Church starts to paint their bases by dividing the Christianity between the Gnostics and the fundamentalists, and fundamentalists exterminate the Gnostics, and you must wonder if there are more details about matriarchal times that were censored in some texts, and John the Baptist had a role greater than Mary Magdalene in the Bible, and now we know why the Church annihilated everyone who said contrary. Reason why we have a system patriarchal instead of Madrid. Coco and Church has always been the great power of world, mainly because it has always used of politics and wars. We know about the knights on the battles fought by men, and we know that the old civilizations as best civilizations. Entire buildings were built around patriarchal societies, but clearly this was not the case in pre-times historical. It seems that the woman played a very most important in society. In that sense were the first queens the incarnation of life itself, and even because only they generate life, yet men understood this and even recognized because it had a role different, but over time something has changed. Anton Park suggests it started before this, when humans decided to become independent and began to build cities. Right in the texts, Sumerians also show us a war between, where it is reflected in the origin of power struggle between men and women. If we want to distinguish between energies that guides matriarchy and patriarchy, just look at the constant struggle between Martin's Wine's War and Peace for find a balance between the two in Sumerian Eden to a historic event. Interesting, we are not talking about legends, but in Sumerian history there were two cities that struggled with each other. Both are part of each other's kingdom. To both cities located in the kingdom of Palace of Eternal Youth governed by him I who have tradition we have teaching wise people or women. Medium. Again we find the idea of the woman, wise woman who passed on the secret. Thanks to that definition we understand that a city was under the tutelage of some gods that were associated with a god and with knowledge of gods, because the wise woman is a kind as a midwife, and for the Sumerians it was woman in charge of genetics responsible for artificial matrices. The word play is between wise and midwife, as the kingdom run by the goddess mother who is between the two kingdoms is a kind of small garden that can be translated as limit of the plan. That in this historic battle between the two kingdoms we find many elements that are linked to the Sumerian Garden of Eden. Through this story we understand that the dispute never ended, even if you study the text a lot. Complete, it is impossible to know the end of conflicts. We all know as that disappeared, and quickly the Reds were that divine protection from him. His son was to reduce workers in order to serve the kingdom and submit all of them to patriarchal gods. When we started to see that the worship of the goddess was giving place to the male gods, the war-if became something fundamental in behavior. Human then ethics and the way of looking at things that was something beautiful and harmonious lasted tens of thousands of years. It was overthrown by the resurgence of the ego male that matches on the timeline with the emergence of the first cities' averages when patriarchy dethroned matriarchy. Women have lost their place in society. Their role as gods and spiritual leaders are harmed by a new perspective. Women were indoctrinated as seductive figures and not, and it marked an era of separation between men and women in older civilizations. They worked together in the Sumerian era, in which it seems to have been considered a character trample like a demon Tim to give knowledge to beings. Humans they give the right to breed among them without the permission of the gods. It was then when he and other gods felt that their reign was being threatened by humans. Jewish tradition, for example, has lost itself whole notion of the female role in spirituality in religion by God Jehovah as a male god. The same is true in the Catholic religion. The idea that there cannot be a woman, pope or cardinals or even bishops is the male control of religious practice. Another important example of taking the patriarchy power occurred in the Greek civilization. Had no right to voting on your opinion is not taken into account for nothing but the house. They were practically not part of the society. We can see this decline. Gradual notion of man and woman working together for humanity more accentuated this energy, reaffirming male purposes, and that evidently manifests itself in nature of our society. If we look at Nikola's experiences Tesla on the nature of creating the energy, another example pointed out that we had explosive energy, which is the male work, while energy female is considered as massive rockets. Just a few scientists sought alternative ways of associated with Vox, taking into account tradition that we hear. This problem of who created reality exactly was a male activity. The demiurge male who created the world is the divine spirit of Sophia, the wisdom divine. There seems to be more interpretation sinister to give more power to the path of male traditions rather than recognize and respect the fact that men and women will work together to create human existence. The disappearance of the wise woman refers to our loss of intuition and emotional intelligence. We need both intuition and logic that are feminine principles and male. If we don't have the emotional intelligence, only the rational logical mind, and selfish, we make many mistakes. It looks like there are signs that we can correct this with that situation. More and more people are hearing your inner voice, the light of consciousness, and through it we can again be complete. But tell me in the comments everything you found. I am Wagner Souza. Strong hug and even